joining Time Out with PSOA, where sports officials share their stories to help recruit, train, educate not only sports officials, but players, coaches, administrators, and fans. Through this information, we're going to help make us all better for the game. Thank you for taking time out with PSOA. Parents, fans, and players. You ever wonder why officials don't officiate the same way every game? Here's your answer. No game is ever exactly the same. Sports officials must officiate using different styles of officiating based on the level of game, ability of players, and strategy being used while the game is being played. To get a better understanding and perspective on the styles of officiating, our guest speaker, Jake Dilsaver, an NCAA, NAIA, JUCO, and high school basketball official during the night, but by day, Lincoln police officer. We'll be taking time to discuss the different styles of officiating and compare how similar it is in our daily lives in conjunction of keeping peace and order. So, Jake, thank you for taking time out with PSOA. Welcome to the show. Any opening words, comments, suggestions of, that comparison of basketball official, law enforcement officer?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, Sean. Thank you for having me. Thank you all. It's not uncommon in my years of officiating when people learn that I am a peace officer for people to remark, oh, wait a second, there's probably some similarities. You probably get yelled at with this uniform similarly to how you get yelled at with the other. And yeah, it goes without saying probably that there are some notable parallels. So I'm excited for the topic today.
Excellent. And I love how you turned law enforcement and police officer into peace officer. So those listeners listening to this podcast understand every day I go out and sports officiate a game. My ultimate goal is to allow that game to go as smooth and peacefully as possible. Jake, every day you go into the office, what are some of those goals you have as a peace officer?
Yeah, it's not ironic, like I said, that there's some parallels, and certainly in my daily regular job, if you will, my regular job, I strive each day. The goal in my unit, the goal of my team, is to improve the lives of people in our community, to keep everybody safe, to do our best to serve those that we are led to, or that our responsibility and obligation is to try to protect.
Excellent. So the first style of officiating, we always start new sports officials with education. We've said it on previous podcasts. Sports officials attend local meetings. Sports officials get into an online learning management system such as UMP app, such as Ref Reps. And we hammer rules. And that style of officiating is first taught to sports officials because we could always hide behind a rule. That is the first step of, coach, this is the rule, this is what the player did. So Jake, when it comes to rulebook, our rulebook in sports is, what is a travel? What is a holding foul? What is an illegal attack? How is that similar to how they have developed you as a peace officer with the law of the land?
Yeah, it translates pretty similarly from the basketball officiating rulebook to the state statute or municipal code in terms of the written law. Certainly, there's some room for interpretation of that law. You may be aware that the Supreme Court, for example, has an odd number of justices, and there's a reason for that. Two people might look at one thing and not see the exact same thing, right? And so this is a similarity with being a peace officer. The similar with being a basketball official is the expectation. It's not much. The fans and the community, they don't ask much. They just want you to be a robot with feelings, right? And so you need to be perfect in in what you see, and then also the gray area too. Because from a rule book, when we talk about the style of rule book, so in police world, similarly, it's the translation of this is the law. This is what the law says. There's no discretion. There's no shifting from it. There's no room for interpretation. This is what the law says. And some methods or styles of policing come across or operate as simply a black and white.
Yeah, and those listeners out there, I will say, I will use the rule book style in all safety situations.
Sure, of
Again,
course.
we're there to protect the game.
Certainly.
So when it comes to jewelry, I always like using this example of I was working baseball and a player had a chain on with a crucifix, slide into second base, and that crucifix went right into his neck. All right, where the rule says no jewelry, and we got to understand why there's no jewelry.
Right.
And then same thing with physical play. If a game gets very rough, you're going to see officials throw more flags, call more fouls, turn to that rule book a lot more because of the safety.
For safety, absolutely. Yep, the same is true in policing, that we reference that. And in a situation where somebody might be in danger or presenting a danger to somebody else or have inflicted physical harm on somebody else, then same exact application, that this is what the statute says, that this met the statute of an assault, for example. And there's an accountability component that goes along with that, similar to adjudicating a penalty, whether it be a common foul, for example.
Yep. All right. Now the next style is when officials have now started working games. We've have experience with players, with coaches, with how games are played with different defenses, different offensives. We actually start learning, like what is going to happen or potentially happen before it happens. And if we have a potential situation that we know that's going to happen, we now try to prevent those situations. So again, it's that correlation of peace officer and sports official. What are some examples as an official and as a police officer where you have used this style of peacekeeping and preventing situations?
Definitely. And you bring up some decent examples with basketball. Just last night, working a game where I'm telling the players, smart with your hands, smart with your hands. That's me communicating, not that you've done something wrong, but I want to keep you from doing something wrong, from a rules standpoint, but preventative in terms of verbalizing that before a foul is committed, for example. In the police officer world, similarly, working with community partners to talk about what the law is on this, or what you should do in this situation, ways to keep yourself safe, ways to mitigate risks, things along those lines. But proactively educating members of the public, working with in partnership to maintain the peace, if you will.
Yeah, I know. I'll use a couple more here. Preventive, 3 seconds. Officials are going to be clear the lane, keep moving to avoid that 3 seconds. And sometimes it's just proximity.
Right.
We could walk towards a player. We can make eye contact with a player. And I know whenever a police officer gets up next to my car, and I'd never text and drive, by the way, Jake. But I make sure I put my cell phone down so there's no question whatsoever. I'm preventing that police officer thinking I'm texting and driving. So pretty cool there.
Yeah, that's preventative maintenance for sure. But yeah, there's a lot of methods of communication besides verbal, right? So physical presence, proximity, that translates to police officer world as well. When police officers are present for an altercation, or when there's some kind of confrontation or disruption, simply physically being present can sometimes help alleviate whatever did transpire or might transpire. And similarly, like you said, with 3 seconds, or simply when there's a hard foul, or when there's a contested blocked shot, and you step in so that the players know that you're right there, or when there's a loose ball on the floor and there's a scrum and a tie up and a held ball or simultaneous possession on the floor, and we stepped in to make sure that they know just the presence is there, and that's influencing and preventing any kind of harm being caused or safety threats, as well as unnecessary fouls taking place.
My heart just leapt when you said held ball. Beautiful.
And that's something in the police officer world where if we use language that's in statute, any member can Google, your respective state, Arizona, Nebraska, Colorado revised statute, and you can read the language of the law. And the same thing applies in basketball. If we use rule book verbiage, I think number one, it helps us be more educated in what we're applying, but it also helps communicate what everybody else is bound by, which is the rule book, right?
Absolutely. And those listeners what's Jake and Sean talking about? A lot of times in a basketball game, when two opponents are holding the basketball at the same time and the officials come up with their 2 thumbs up, the crowd yells jump ball, or coach yells jump ball. The correct terminology is held ball. A jump ball will start the game, and a jump ball will start overtime period. But a held ball, we'll use the alternating possession arrow. That's what we're talking about there. All right, we are now past the novice. We got the rules under control. We are preventing a lot of situations. We're managing the game. Now, here comes the nuts and bolts. I mean, we're in the nitty gritty. We're moving up. We have 200 games underneath our belt, and we think we're ready for, the national championship. And what a lot of times coaches, players, fans, and officials trying to get there don't realize there is a lot of now advantage, disadvantage style of where we know the rules, we know how to apply the rules, but we have to learn when do we as peace officers step in and get involved to adjudicate the rule. Does it fit the play? Does it fit the game? So you want to talk a little bit about how we have to now start processing so many more elements of when we see an infraction, and does it gain an advantage or does it not gain an advantage?
Absolutely. And I think you hit the nail on the head with the intro into this topic. I mean, somebody way wiser than me put it, the balance of the art and the science, right? The science is the rules, the art is the application of the rules. And from a perspective of basketball officiating, we talk about like the game within the game, right? So the competitive matchups that we know are going to be contested, with the backstory, if these teams have a history, or if these players have a history, especially if it's recent, things like that. And all of those things factor into all of the information that we have to process as basketball officials when we're making a decision. From the stands or from a video standpoint, you look at what you think is a singular isolated play in a black and white context. And sometimes in those decisions, though, we're calculating the gravity of this call, what this could lead to if it's not enforced, or conversely, what could happen if it is enforced, or if it's enforced incorrectly. And kind of a similar thing takes place in peace officer world. So I've been a peace officer for 15 years, actually the same time that I've been a high school basketball official, and a collegiate official for a few years shorter than that. But you talk about in police officer terms, we talk about aggravating or mitigating circumstances. So a lot of people talk about like being stopped by the police for a traffic infraction or speeding or something. But there's a few things that can factor into that, right? So if it's 2:00 in the morning and there's no other traffic, or no other cars, no other pedestrians, and it's a wide open highway, and how fast, how much over the speed limit was that person going, right? So those are mitigating circumstances, right? Versus potentially aggravating, which might be it's a school zone and school just got let out, and there are hundreds of children, 8-year-old kids walking across the street, and this is really reckless driving, although it's the exact, it's 5 over the speed limit in the school zone, right? But those circumstances certainly play into the not just advantage, disadvantage, but like I said, mitigating or aggravating. They factor into the decision-making process, right? And the processing of information. And when you've got more and more games under your belt, like you said, and you think you're ready for the world championship, of course, we always want to exercise a bit of humility and know that we've all got plenty of room to grow, right? But you as you reflect on your progression as an official or as a peace officer, you have some mindfulness of the things that you've learned along the way, and that helps you realize that there's probably stuff you still don't know.
Yeah, and right at the beginning of this episode, we talked about everybody listening to this podcast, somehow, some way, you are making these same exact decisions every single day. Here's some examples. If you have a child and you have a parenting decision to make, curfew, you set the curfew at 10 o'clock and they come home at 10:01. Hey, the rule's the rule. You just lost the car for 2 weeks. Or what are the circumstances? Well, it's 10:01 because your son or daughter made a safe decision to take their friends home because they needed a ride. You helped
Right.
somebody out. You have to take that into consideration as a parent.
Right.
You have type A and type B personalities or officials. You want them to call everything. It's a foul, it's a foul, it's a foul, versus no harm, no foul.
Sure.
Let the kids play versus somebody's going to get hurt out here.
Sure.
You have to take all this into consideration. As we get near the end of this episode, Jake, I'm going to ask you the past 15 years as a peace officer, how has being a sports official made you a better peace officer?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's a connection that translates both directions. But in basketball, because of the game within the game that we kind of talked about a moment ago, you've got to process a lot of information and make a decision and have the explanation ready when you made the decision, right? That explanation needs to be in place before you put air in your whistle, right? And similarly, that translates into being a peace officer, that before making a decision to apprehend somebody or to detain somebody, you have to have an explanation of, I took these actions because the process of justifying what I did has to be preemptive and has to hold water, obviously. It's been a tremendous career that I've had, but certainly like we've talked about, the similarities are frequent, from de-escalation in peace officer world to conflict resolution with an upset coach, to communication, whether it's with players, whether it's with partners, being an effective communicator. Certainly lots of translation and parallels.
All right. And so have you ever made a mistake as a sports official?
For sure.
What have you done after you made that mistake to learn from it and to prevent that mistake happening again?
Gosh, I think for me personally, and not everybody develops the same way, but owning the mistake for me is the biggest thing for me. Acknowledging that I made the mistake, whether internally or externally, and of course it depends on your audience, who you're with, your comfort level, if it's your safe space to talk about what mistake you might have made, or a judgment you might have, a rule you might have kicked, or something like that. But certainly for me, it starts with acknowledging it and then growing from it, because I can count on both hands, and I need a few more hands to look at the mistakes. But they're generally pretty meaningful in terms of not making the same one again.
And then can you carry that now into the peace officer? When you make a mistake as a peace officer, is it that same owning it and trying to make it right?
Definitely. It's a personal accountability thing, right? And sometimes not everybody knows about it. Of course, in today's world, no peace officer wants to be the headline. I mean, bar none. But but still on a daily basis, knowing, I just had a conversation yesterday with a coworker about how could I do this better, you know? So yeah, certainly a translation.
The last part that we're going to talk about here is social media and what our culture is showing on a continual basis when it comes to peace officers and sports officials. You know, it's not very often do you see the good that comes out of sports officiating or the
Sure.
good that comes out of peace officers. And
Yeah.
that scares a lot of potential peace officers away and sports officials away. You haven't as much experience as you have. What kind of advice can you give our listeners to let them know there's so much more safety involved and there's so much reward being a peace officer and sports official? If they're scared to start, to forget about being scared, there's so much more good.
Yeah, it's easy for us to say when we officiated in a world and policed in a world without social media, right? But I think that we just have to be mindful of what you said, that the good doesn't make the headline, right? And so if you think about the fact that there are, I mean, literally in my city today, there have been thousands, you know, I've been at work, it's been 5.5 hours into the day right now, and there have been thousands of contacts between citizens and peace officers just in my city alone, and none of them will make the headlines. Some of them are great stories. Some of them are stories of people helping people, right? Humans connecting with humans. And the same thing with officiating, that there are thousands and thousands of plays that happen that there's no issue for every play that makes a headline of, wow, can you believe this happened, right? There are thousands of good ones that just don't, you know, they don't sell clicks.
Well, Jake, I appreciate you taking the time out with PSOA today, giving the perspective of how to apply rules, how to prevent infractions, how to use advantage and disadvantage to make that ultimate decision as a sports official. But more importantly, thank you for the community service you have given the city of Lincoln as a peace officer. It truly is remarkable, not only what you do, but your fellow coworkers do for the community on and off the court and in and out of the community that you serve.
Well, thank you very much, Sean. I appreciate you having me. I really enjoy the podcast. And my only parting message, I guess, would be that officiating, there's a lot of people that played sports that enjoyed it. And there's a similar challenge to, you know, to call the perfect game, just like you wanted to make every free throw. There's a similar challenge there. It's a ton of fun and it's very rewarding. The same thing in the peace officer world. There's applications open if you want to go make a difference in your community. And there are challenging times, but there are fun times, and there are certainly rewarding times that should be savored.
Listeners of the PSOA, take a time out with PSOA podcasts. Make sure you follow us on our YouTube channel. Make sure you follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. And remember, you're only as good as your last call.
A Herd at Sports Network production.